Good morning. Welcome to the Greening of Commercial Property in New Zealand webinar by ANZ. My name is Kelly Bunyan and I'm Head of Property at ANZ. Prior to joining ANZ, I have a long history in real estate, 20 to 30 years working across property and construction, and part of that was as a property and construction lawyer. So I've really seen the evolution of green property flourish in New Zealand, and we're at a really interesting point in time at the moment around what greening property looks like currently and where we're heading in the future. We have some great speakers to talk to that today, but before we push on into the webinar, we would like to draw your attention to some important information. You would have seen our insights paper, and in joining the webinar today, we just wanted to highlight that the content of the webinar is for information purposes only, as is the insights paper that ANZ released a few weeks ago. The information is not to be construed as advice. We're happy to clarify or talk to you about the paper or the webinar after the event, so please reach out to us if you have any further questions. Before we move forward, I would like to just highlight that the webinar is live. It is being recorded. We would love you to interact with us. There is a Q&A button at the top of the screen. We will take questions at the end of the presentation, so we give ample time for our speakers to talk to the content. We will also run a poll at the end of the presentation too, and we'd love to hear your feedback around the paper, but also this webinar. I did want to also highlight that we have auto-muted and disabled the webcams, but every now and again there is a glitch, so we would appreciate it if you could just check your settings and make sure that your camera is off and your microphone is muted, just so we can make sure that the presenters have a good runway to talk through their content without interruption. If we move to the next slide, please. Thank you. I referenced the ANZ Insights paper previously, and I'm guessing that's why you've turned up today. We're really, really proud of the paper that we've released to market, and we're very grateful for the contribution that we've received from our stakeholders, our customers and our clients in pulling the content together. We're also really grateful for the feedback that we've had from the paper. It's already started to stimulate some great debate within the industry and lessons learned. We did want to talk a wee bit about the content. So there is a lot of content in there around current and future state of greening property. We've also talked about green finance, and we've given some insights too around what we're doing from an operational lens at ANZ around greening our commercial real estate. Like all other businesses, there's no magic lever that we can pull at one point in time, but we all know in the property and construction industry, whether you're a landlord, a tenant or a developer, that we all have a role to play, and some of those small incremental changes that we can make on a day-to-day basis really help move us forward to a more sustainable future. So I'll just move to the next slide. Thank you. The paper is available, of course, online, and we're happy to share a link to it again via this webinar so you can socialise it further. In introducing our speakers, I've introduced myself. We have Andrew Eagles with us here today. Andrew is the CEO of New Zealand Green Building Council. We're lucky to have Ben Masters with us as well, who's Principal Sustainability at Beca for Sustainable Buildings, as well as Richard Hinchcliffe, my colleague, Director of Sector Strategies for ANZ Institutional. Our first presenter is Andrew Eagles today, and most of you obviously will know Andrew as the CEO of New Zealand Green Building Council. He's an economist, actually, and you may not know that, but it all kind of hangs together when you think about his previous workplace and experience within the industry. He's worked in Wellington and London for 13 years before returning to Auckland, and I know him as one of the most passionate people about achieving a lower carbon, healthier future for New Zealand. So it gives me a tremendous amount of pleasure to introduce Andrew now to complete his presentation. Over to you, Andrew. Thank you.
Kia ora, everybody online and the other speakers. Ina mana, ina reo, I rā rangatira mā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I'm really honoured to come and speak with you today. Congratulations to ANZ on their exceptionally useful insights paper, The Greening of Commercial Property. That's an exceptionally useful resource with some great case studies and really useful guide in terms of numbers and impact of greening and improving the health of new and existing buildings. It's delightful to be with Ben, Richard and Kelly on this call. They're exceptional, really knowledgeable professionals. We really look forward to your engagement and some great questions. And it's tremendous when Ben comes on that he has as his backdrop one of the best provinces in New Zealand, Taranaki. I'm from Taranaki, so there's a strong Taranaki contingent today. So in terms of the New Zealand Green Building Council, we're a not-for-profit. Our vision is all homes and buildings in Aotearoa, green and sustainable, making healthier, happier New Zealanders. And when we were formed by the construction and property sector, they said the thing they needed most was a way to verify which homes and buildings are healthier and lower carbon. So you've got some of those listed on the screen there. I'll be focusing on Green Star and NABERS commercial buildings, but we also operate in the residential space. We're a member of the World Green Building Council, a global initiative with 73 other countries. So we work with over 700 members to further this objective, and I'm just really proud that as a sector, we have solutions, and a huge proportion of our members are pushing for change and wanting lower carbon, healthier buildings, whether it's councils, product manufacturers, engineers and architects, listed entities, property professionals or builders. Next slide, please. What do we do? If I just go from the bottom left, we educate the sector with training and knowledge. We advocate for change by talking to ministers and others about lower carbon, healthier building code. We collaborate, such as this event today, with ANZ and Beca, and then we rate buildings through third-party verification to ensure which buildings are healthier and lower carbon. Next slide, please. So I'll just talk about new buildings, existing buildings, and then fit-outs. Often these are forgotten, but lots of people rarely build a new building. So existing buildings and when you fit out provide a really good opportunity to reduce carbon, reduce bills, and improve health. And then I'll just mention some simple steps you can take. Next slide, please. Right, so when people think about green buildings, they're often thinking about a new building. When we created this standard with the sector, we brought over the standard from Australia, and then we spent about 2 years working with the sector to look at what would work for New Zealand. A big focus in the tool is health and well-being, carbon emissions, and resilience. So by that we mean reducing surface water runoff, reducing flooding risk, and adapting to our changing climate. So you can see that elements that have been included there by all of the community that oversee the tool. So you have 36 people, such as Ben, who sit on the advisory group or the reference panels that feed into this. You can see there the scoring mechanism. Most of our clients aim for 5-star, some go for 6-star, and some people, when they are finding it more of a challenge, they achieve 4-star, which is New Zealand best practice. 6-star is world leadership. Next slide, please. We have a huge amount of uptake. The public sector are required, central government have 144 government departments that need to build to 5 Green Star when they build new. And here you've got a list of our private clients who are taking up and requiring Green Star when they build. So everything from Auckland Airport to Kiwi Property to Countdown's new supermarkets, Air New Zealand, Panuku Development Auckland, a large range of organisations taking that forward because they want healthier buildings, less waste to landfill, and a lower carbon future. Next slide, please. And here's a great example. So we have the Mason Brothers building in Auckland that was refurbished to the Green Star standard. And I really like this slide because it shows the impact for people. They've seen a reduction in absenteeism and an increase in productivity. And they've seen a lot more people cycling in as a result of really good end-of-trip facilities that Green Star helps encourage. And they said that this has led to a really big increase in their productivity of their staff. And we know that there's a return in terms of financial performance. So here's some data from 3 different indices checking the value of Green Star buildings relative to non-Green Star buildings. And so some of those found a reduction in operating costs, and others found an increase in rental value or an increase in value. Some of that is quite marked, and that again is why many of our clients take up Green Star. And so you can see here the dramatic rise we've seen in the last 4 years. It's due to great advocates like Ben and Richard on the call, but also real interest in improving the health and reducing running costs in our buildings. So relative to 5 years ago, we've had about a 4-fold increase in the uptake of Green Star buildings, and that's across industrial, retail, schools, social infrastructure, office buildings, swimming pools, a whole raft of building types. Next slide, please. I'll just briefly talk about existing buildings, because there's really good opportunities here. So we have in New Zealand a rating scheme called NABERS that the Energy Efficiency Conservation Authority, a government agency, has on license to run. And it measures how energy efficient office buildings are from a 1-star up to a 6-star. The really exciting thing about NABERS is once people start measuring, they see real reductions in their running costs. So next slide, please. So this graph is a result of thousands and thousands and thousands of buildings that have been through NABERS. And what they found from this Australian data is that each incremental assessment against the NABERS regime reduced running costs of the building. So you can see the average reduction in energy use after multiple NABERS ratings. And you can see that each year you get a bit of an increase in savings, leading to, once you've had 10 or so ratings, 30 to 40% reduction in running costs. The other really great thing about getting a NABERS rating is it opens up government agencies, because government agencies, if they're taking up new office space, larger office space, they need to have a NABERS rating before they move in. And we know that these sorts of savings delivers tens and tens of thousands of dollars, potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars in reduced running costs for the owner and the tenants. So again, we're seeing this real rise as the New Zealand commercial building sector transforms to a lower carbon future. Here you've seen we used to be at 20 to 30 ratings per year for NABERS. Now we're likely to hit 150 ratings this year, and even greater growth in future years. And there is also talk of this becoming mandatory for office buildings, larger office buildings, over 1,500 square metres or above, as they've done in Australia about 14 years ago. Next slide, please. Right, so that was office buildings, and what we've had is clients say to us, we'd like to rate our non-office buildings and improve. So we have a scheme called Green Star Performance that enables measurement and improvement of existing buildings, whether they're offices or non-offices. So we've been rating a whole range of building types with a scheme called Green Star Performance. Next slide, please. So this is an example of an office building in Christchurch. It achieved both NABERS for the energy efficiency, but also they wanted to check the things like air quality, water use, waste that's been created through operations. So they undertook Green Star performance as well. And we've had stadiums, we've had a range of building types, retail, even crematoriums take up Green Star performance as a way to check and measure how energy efficient they are. Next slide, please. So there's this amazing revolution happening with new and existing commercial buildings where we're helping retirement villages, industrial buildings, retail, a whole raft of building types to measure and verify their performance. And that's great for sustainable finance, it's great for health, and it's great for carbon and running costs. Next slide, please. The one other area I'll just touch on briefly is fit outs, because every 5 to 8 years people take out fit outs to their buildings. I thought I'd share with you an example from Tonkin and Taylor. They focused on waste, great indoor environment with plants, solar panels, low emissions printers, low VOC paints, and they've committed to 6 Green Star interiors for the health and well-being of their staff, and also for a lower carbon future. And what's great is you don't need to be building new. This is a great option for those of you with existing buildings when you're doing a fit out. Next slide, please. Here are some other steps they took. They're committed to this rating on their other buildings throughout Aotearoa, New Zealand. So EV chargers, water saving showers and washing machines, engagement with occupants, environmentally preferred timber, and other steps they've taken delivered their the world-leading 6 Green Star interiors. And I understand it's been really well received by staff who want to live in a healthier, who want to work in a healthier environment. Next slide, please. So just to finish, we've clearly got Ben, Richard, and then questions from you. Do get thinking of what those are. Do consider how to build efficiently and to electrify. That's better for our grid, it's better for your building. Measure and improve existing buildings, green your fit outs, and evidence this at the built stage. I hope that's been useful. I really look forward to the discussion. Kia ora, and back to you, Kelly.
Thanks, Andrew, much appreciated. Super great content and very excited to see those ratings coming up. I know there's a lot more that you could talk about. We literally had to keep the time slots quite tight, but fascinating and really interesting conversation. So certainly looking forward to the Q&A session at the end. I do see a question coming through at the moment, but we will keep to time on the presentations. So next up is Ben Masters from Beca. Ben leads the Sustainable Buildings team in his professional services consulting company called Beca. Ben has over 20 years of international experience, and he's got a real focus on making the complex problems simple, which we all love. So Ben, I will pass to you, and thank you again for talking to us today.
Thanks, Kelly. So yeah, kia ora tātou, ko Ben Masters tāku ingoa. Yeah, so my role at Beca, I'm a principal focused solely on sustainable buildings. So what that means, roughly half my time is spent focusing on helping to deliver sustainable building projects for clients, and that's various aspects covering new developments, defining sustainability briefs, but also existing buildings, helping to decarbonise, undergo building refurbishments. The other half of my time is I manage a team of specialist sustainable building consultants throughout New Zealand and Australia. So if you go to the next slide, please. So Beca's experience with sustainable buildings has been pretty broad. I guess we first kind of got started back in 2007 when we helped deliver New Zealand's first Green Star rated building. That was the Meridian Energy building in Wellington. And that since has gone on to achieve New Zealand's first 6-star NABERS certified building as well. When I look back, what I think Andrew touched on this, the range of buildings that are actually targeting sustainability has changed quite significantly. It did used to be commercial office, but now there's any type of building can actually focus on sustainability. what that means for those buildings does change, and the focus areas do change quite a lot. So, but it is quite interesting how far we've actually come as an industry. Another thing I find quite interesting is that the focus areas have changed significantly. It used to be more energy efficiency. There was a big focus on health and well-being, but I think now we kind of know the evidence is a lot more firmed up about why we should actually invest and focus in these areas. At the beginning, it was a bit more novel. We had to prove the benefits, but now it's a lot more accepted. Next slide, please. 2 forward. Yep. So yeah, there has been a dramatic shift over the last few years, which I think has been driven by the government leadership, New Zealand government leadership, as Andrew touched on. They've mandated NABERS certification for government tenancies, and government-owned buildings of a minimum size also have to be Green Star certified. So that has triggered quite a shift, but also primarily a broader acceptance of climate change. Really is translated to people really wanting to do the right thing, and that cascades through tenant expectations and developer responsibilities as well. Some of the key benefits, as I said, they're a lot more proven now, the business benefits of targeting a green building. But by far, what we, and Andrew touched on this as well, by far the biggest benefit is healthier, more comfortable environments for staff and for tenants. And we're seeing this at the moment with, especially after COVID, with tenants really wanting to get their staff back into the office. So if you can deliver a more comfortable, healthier environment, there is that driver to actually get staff back into the office. They want to be there rather than working from home. Another trend that we're seeing is the overall optics of actually being in a green building, and the sustainability narrative, especially when it comes to carbon, that goes with that, which is translating into adaptive reuse quite strongly, making the best use of existing buildings, because we can't really build ourselves to a zero carbon future. We've got to make the best use of what we already have. Next slide, please. So yeah, the way we're approaching sustainability, we're really trying to align a sustainable building brief with an organisational strategy and overall sustainability objectives, rather than jumping to the bottom line here, which is kind of getting into the detail, into the features, which is how we used to do it. Really trying to take the time to understand the logic and the investment value of investing, going down different pathways, different focus areas. So understanding broader sustainability objectives, how that can be articulated into a sustainability brief, the overall vision, principles, targets, how they can be measured, what are the must-have sustainability features to achieve those targets. And it provides a bit more of a logical approach and aligning with overall value opportunity of a green building. It's the same when you're approaching the sustainability tools such as Green Star. If you just start, if you jump straight to the credits, there's a tendency just to focus on achieving a rating at the lowest capital cost, but that won't give you the most long-term value. So really important to take the time, understand, tailor the approach to suit your overall objectives. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to touch on a few projects that have actually gone through that process, and they've achieved really successful outcomes, quite different projects. So the first one is University of Auckland B201 redevelopment. So it's actually achieved New Zealand's highest ever Green Star certification, 6-star. That wasn't their original intention to target Green Star, but they kind of pivoted midway through their development. It was initially going to be a modest fit out, took the opportunity to significantly decarbonise their existing building, move away from fossil fuel gas consumption and go to electric heat pumps, upgrade the building envelope, and construct a new timber atrium, plus a number of other features. So it shows what can be done at scale in terms of adaptive reuse, world-class, world-leading adaptive reuse project. This is a project I've been involved with over the number of years, which has actually been in operation now for over a year. The thing I like about this project is that it's a very typical New Zealand commercial office building, especially in Wellington. And it shows what can be achieved adopting a pragmatic approach within a budget. But it's achieved remarkable energy decarbonisation outcomes. So it's achieved a 5.5-star NABERS certification, which provides the evidence that that the energy and operational carbon is around about 67% less than a typical New Zealand office building. It also achieved a Green Star 5 as-built rating, which provides the evidence that the building was actually constructed to Green Star 5 level. So the approach we took was really focused on pragmatism, and we didn't have to upgrade the existing glazing to double glazing. Through computer modeling, we actually to inform the approach, we actually adopted an innovative low-E glazing film, but also insulated external walls, roof, ceilings, and decarbonised the building, again going with electric heat pumps. Next slide, please. This project, again, an existing building that has been adapted. The approach here for Cloudy Bay was really to enhance their brand, enhance the visitor experience to their winery, but also utilise sustainability as a means to align with their overall organisational ESG objectives. Quite a modest project, definitely the smallest project I've worked on, but it proves that you can achieve leading sustainability outcomes for the smaller projects. So this project actually won the Property Council Award for Sustainability last year. But yeah, really cool space. I'm yet to be there, but really want to check it out next time I'm in Blenheim. The Celadora experience. It's all about showcasing sustainability. Next slide, please. So where to start? It is really important to take the time to understand what's most important and develop a robust brief. And as I said before, aligning with your organisational values and how that can translate into a building brief. There's a lot going on in the sustainability space. There's a lot of noise, but really understanding what's important. Getting that brief established prior to setting a budget is really important as well. Otherwise, you'd always be chasing, going around in circles, trying to work within a budget that hasn't really acknowledged what you ultimately are trying to achieve. Taking the time, really important. Next slide, please. So when it comes to existing buildings, I guess the key bit of advice is really understanding what you've got, and that can mean different things. In terms of the age and the life of your, especially when it comes to building services, the life of your plant and equipment, when they may be requiring an upgrade. Establishing an overall roadmap, especially when it comes to decarbonisation, better to be proactive in that space rather than wait to a point in time that you're forced to do something. But also as part of that roadmap, you're understanding how can you leverage that to make the most of it and maximise those opportunities. And yeah, I guess why we're here today, it's talking about sustainable finance. I think it's a key component of decarbonisation at the moment. It does come at a cost. It's really important to make the most of that. Another aspect is really this is where Green Star and NABERS, in my view, really have their place is actually in the assurance side of things. I see them as quite, but basically giving you that insurance, that policy way I think about it, in terms of actually getting what you pay for. It's amazing the level of quality that actually is improved just by targeting a Green Star rating, the handover documentation, commissioning, things like meters getting installed and commissioned, even though you've paid for them, you're actually going to get a better outcome just by the process of targeting Green Star certification. Go to the next slide, please. So in terms of decarbonisation, it's really important to understand where your emissions are in your building. This just shows a typical breakdown, but every building is different. So taking the time, there's things you can do now to really actually understand that before you actually jump into looking at energy efficiency opportunities. Another aspect is understanding when it comes to replacing boilers, actually understanding what they call the peak load, actually the actual real size of your heating plant, what it actually needs to be. We're finding that there's lots of opportunity to actually reduce that size when you're actually moving to heat pumps. Next slide, please. Yeah, so developing a roadmap, really important. Also understanding if there's any key triggers over the next few years, that will be an opportune time to actually undergo your decarbonisation. Is there any, and if there's any, if there's any things you can do now, are there any aspects of your overall roadmap? But most important to know where you're heading, rather than be kind of forced to do things, if you be proactive in that space. So there's a number of key triggers we're finding. Some of the key ones are seismic upgrades, boiler replacements, chiller replacements, tenancies becoming vacant. It's really important to make the most of those opportunities to reduce the overall cost of decarbonisation. In terms of the challenges, it's somewhat the technical challenge of moving to making your building electric, going to heat pumps, electrifying, but one of the commercial challenges is keeping your tenants in the building, keeping the building commercials working as they should. That's, can be a bigger challenge. So yeah, again, having that roadmap in mind over the next few years is super important. Go to the next slide. Yeah, so in a nutshell, really important, take your time to understand what does good look like for you, for your organisation. Understand a really clear vision and a framework to deliver, and have a means of validating your sustainability outcomes, and having that means of assurance, very important as well. Next slide. Thank you. So back to Kelly.
Thanks, Ben. That was an awesome presentation. I loved the roadmap, and you've touched on some really important points, including investment of seismic upgrades versus investment in sustainability in the buildings. And I think we should talk about that in the Q&A, because it's a really interesting landscape to play in New Zealand, and there's obviously tension between investing capital in those two aspects in relation to portfolios. But before we tip into Q&A, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Richard Hinchcliffe, who works for Institution here at ANZ, Institutional Bank. Richard's a banker by trade. He's worked in various overseas markets. He has a strong interest in healthcare, retirement villages, strategy and sustainability, and has been pivotal in helping establish New Zealand's first mass market green loan. So very grateful that you've joined us today too, Richard, and I will pass to you. Thank you.
Right, thanks, Kelly. Morning, everyone. I've only got 3 slides, so it won't take long to go through this. So I'm going to talk about the ANZ Business Green Loan. So if we can have the next slide, please. It was interesting, Ben briefly mentioned about sustainable finance, and we launched the Green Loan in 2022, but we'd been spending quite a bit of time before then thinking about it. And sustainable finance really was for the very large companies, and it was very bespoke. And we had perhaps two key objectives for the ANZ Business Green Loan. That was one, to help companies to transition to net zero, but we wanted to be mass market, and so that was important. So moving away from that bespoke and only for large companies. We were trying to bring sustainable finance to everybody, whether you're a farmer or a property owner or a manufacturer. So what is the green loan? Well, it does follow some green loan principles. It is very asset specific. And the aim is to reduce emissions, so to help companies reduce their emissions or to lower their energy use and costs. So we've heard from Andrew and Ben around that, and we wanted the green loan to help companies be better with the environment. The loan is for 3 million max, and it's got a really attractive interest rate. Of 6.45 when I looked earlier today, so really attractive. So what does it cover? You'll see on your screen that we've got 7 broad categories, and these are the areas that the green loan will cover. So I'll just sort of point out a couple, and you all might be interested in that clean transportation. So that's electric vehicles or indeed hydrogen vehicles. So it'll help you to move your fleet from diesel to EV. What's been popular with our farmers, actually, just as an aside, is that sustainable water. So it will help some dairy farmers to change their effluent system or improve some of their water storage. So I probably hear you say, what's that got to do with those property guys? So yeah, so what I want to do is just to talk about what and how the green loan can help property owners and investors. So on the next slide, I've sort of highlighted 3 of those categories that I think you're going to be interested in. So energy efficiency. So we've heard the 2 speakers earlier talk about energy, and so that's going to be that's going to help you to be more energy efficient. So maybe you want to change your chillers. You may want to put some more efficient heat pumps in there. You might want to do some glazing, or it might be as simple as just changing your lighting and moving to LED lighting, which will help lower your energy use. So the green loan can be used for that. Green buildings, obviously that's a core part of what we're talking about today, and we can help do that. So there's some criteria around the green loan and for this. So the criteria for green buildings, for example, you need to be aiming for 5 or 6 star for Green Star. On the neighbour side, if you're going to do that, aim for a 4, 5 or 6 rating for that, and that will the cost to do that work. You can use the ANZ Business Green Loan for that, and then don't forget that's 6.45%. And also do Green Star interiors, and I've actually been around that Tonkin and Taylor interior. It's a very nice fit out there. And the last one I wanted to talk about was renewable energy, and obviously the classic one here is going to be solar. I think we all know that solar price for panels have come down, and the payback periods have shortened, and there's no doubt about it. I think your roof is an asset today. I've quickly rattled through it, but hopefully that's given you a good idea of what the green loan can do and how you can use it. And I'm going to pass back to Kelly for some Q&A.
Wonderful. Thanks, Richard. Really great insights into what's happening in the evolution of our thinking around green financing and tethering that to the property and construction industry. I might just ask the presenters to turn their cameras back on so we can start the Q&A, and just reminding you too that we will put a poll up shortly just to get your feedback in relation to the webinar. Some really great insights. So thank you again for everybody that's participated today, speaker-wise and also attendees. What I'm hearing and what I see at an industry level is that there is an increased awareness that property and construction have a real role in driving New Zealand's sustainable future forward. And that starts with often the tenant, the developer and the landlord aligning on the aspirations in relation to a building. And sometimes those aspirations extend beyond green building certifications to other aspects of ESG. So Andrew, we've got a couple of questions coming through in the chat at the moment, so I might just tip the first one to you. What does it take, or why does it take more ratings for offices to reduce energy use over shopping centres? And I might just ask you to expand on that too, because shopping centres is obviously a very different kettle of fish to corporate offices, and you've got industrial in there as well, which is also an interesting beast to assess from a certification perspective. So feedback would be great. Thank you.
Well, kia ora for the question. Thanks so much. I see someone got straight in and asked that, so that's really good engagement. Thank you. Look, I think the reality is that it comes down to the specific building and the place they're in terms of what's possible and what can be achieved. But we know that on new build and existing, it's possible to hit that 40 to 70% reduction, you know, as Ben pointed out with those examples. I suspect that part of the reason for that, for the change, may have been that offices started significantly earlier than the retail buildings. So offices first had a NABERS requirement or a voluntary uptake in the early 2000s, and then it became mandatory, whereas you get further along and then the NABERS regime hit retail or shopping centre spaces, and the technology and the know-how had advanced. And so that was about 5 years later. And so people were able to make more significant reductions because there was better technology, you know, the chillers and the technology were better and the know-how was better. But fundamentally on new build or existing, it is possible to hit those quite high targets and get lower running costs and a better building. Really good for things like Task Force on Climate-related Financial Disclosures or your portfolio approach, whether you're fitting out, whether you're measuring existing or building new. I hope that helps. Happy to talk through further.
That was awesome. Thanks, Andrew. I'll leave it there unless there's any follow-up questions on that point. I think the next question is a great one for all of us to cover off, actually. What are the main objectives you are hearing as to why property owners are not greening their property? Ben, I might pass to you in the first instance, then to Andrew.
To be honest, it's a bit hard for me. I mean, most of the property owners we're dealing with, they are doing, you know, they are greening. But I think some of the feedback I provided for the paper was, I think it is really driven by tenant demand. So especially government tenants, they have to get their NABERS rating, which is we're seeing as a big trigger for landlords to decarbonise their buildings, invest in energy efficiency. If they don't, the government tenants are moving out. It's as simple as that. It's so it is a big driver. But apart from those, I mean, I think it's an education, understanding the risks. If you don't do something now, if you don't invest in green property, you could have a stranded asset. It's all commercial. It's just understanding those risks and when you're going to take action, I think.
Great, thanks, Ben. Any further thoughts, Andrew?
Oh, I think Ben and Richard spoke really well on this, really. I think what can happen is people take a really simplistic approach of, look, it's going to cost this much additional and this is my energy savings. And it's only when you think more strategically, i.e., does this increase my value to the market? Does this open up government tenants? Is this something that will keep my staff longer? Can I pitch this as a health and well-being piece? Is there potentially future regulation coming? When you think wider, more strategically, that the the right option becomes more and more clear, and the future is clearly low carbon and healthy. And so once you add in those additional elements, it really starts to make a lot more sense.
Can I add, Kelly? Can I just add a
Sure,
little
absolutely.
bit there? I think there's a lack of understanding, and I think some people are not doing it because they're not quite up to speed with either what's happening in the market or what is possible. I think cost is always going to be one that people need to get comfortable with, and certainly with high interest rates, that's a real concern. And often I've heard, the tenant's not asking for any change or anything, so why should I? But I would just sort of preface all that with, so what I sort of, if I talked to a company 18 months ago, that might have been the view. And then you go and talk to them again maybe a year later, and they've changed their position slightly on it. And what I find is it's really slow, fast, and then they've worked out, and they're concerned that they're, as Ben said about, it's a stranded asset. We don't want a stranded asset. We want to attract the really good tenants, and then suddenly that they're into it. So it's not that they're not doing it. I just think it's a process, if you like, and a strategy process and a thinking process, and it does take a little bit of time, but it moves quite quickly. And once you're into it, then I think companies want to change, and then they get a little bit of momentum, and then they really want to change everything, and then they're into it. So I think that's the sort of evolution of it. So I would expect that snowball to get bigger and bigger.
Yep, I agree. Good feedback from all of you, and I think you've touched on a really important point. We're still learning around what a green building actually is, and in the absence of any hardwired legislation, we're relying on volunteers to green assets, and we're becoming much more market aware around what that looks like, and we know that we need to be making decisions that are intergenerational decisions about property, and some of that actually tethers back to the social aspects that you highlighted, Ben, in your presentation. And again, seismic versus investment in green property. There's always been that tension in New Zealand, but I think there's a broader understanding now that green doesn't necessarily need to cost you more. It's that alignment between a developer, a landlord, and a tenant, and prioritising the outcome of a green building and how that dovetails back into the aspirations of those that are contracting for it. A number of questions coming through at the moment, so I will box on from that point. I note Meridian was mentioned earlier, and see that they have now pivoted to Living Building Challenge for their fit out space. What other global accreditations are relevant in the New Zealand market? I might toss to you, Ben and Andrew, for that one.
I think the point I want to make is there are a lot of rating tools internationally. Green Star and NABERS are by far the most well understood with the market in New Zealand, especially commercial market. So you really have to think carefully, if you're targeting something else, is that value understood by the market? Secondly, the kind of tools aren't, as I said in my presentation, it's more important to understand where your focus areas are from a sustainability outcomes perspective. Then you can look at the tools, which ones actually are the best fit, and overall, which are going to deliver on those outcomes. Some of them are focused on particular aspects, energy, carbon. Some of them holistic, like Green Star. So again, really important to take your time and understand which will achieve your overall sustainability objectives.
Yeah, really good, Ben. I think that's really well said, and also worth noting, if you're looking at a range of rating tools, how each of those can deliver. So sometimes rating tools can reward the credits that other rating tools have. So if it's an internationally accredited rating tool, and sometimes there's an emphasis in one area, but you could look into tools and see that they focus on health and well-being or resilience as well. So there is a really good stock take of all rating tools available in New Zealand that we launched with the Property Council of New Zealand. It's available on our website and also PCNZ, which shows a bit of a comparison around those tools.
Great, thanks, Andrew. And you mentioned before Global Trends Australia have some framework in place now that you think might come to New Zealand at some point. Where do you see Green Star and NABERS ratings, etc., heading in New Zealand, and Green Building Council's role in that?
Oh, kia ora. Yeah, we are seeing a really strong demand for an increasing array of tools for existing buildings. So we have NABERS for office buildings, but we're getting clients saying, could we have NABERS for warehouses, for a range of building types? So we're working with ECA to look at that. And if that's of interest, do be in touch. Our role is to draw the market along to higher standards. Most of the OECD has moved to a higher building code, which makes transparent the carbon emissions when you're designing or building a new home or building. And they also have ratings on existing buildings. So the New Zealand building code and not requiring either of those things is decades behind. And it's actually quite hard to see how we can hit our carbon targets without moving on the built environment, which is 20% of all of our emissions. So I'm really proud that as a sector, we are saying to ministers and others, we're ready to take action and can take steps forward. And those clients that Richard and you and others are talking to who do move on this agenda are going to be ready, and they're going to be in place and able to deliver for their tenants, ahead of others, because they're going to have great lower carbon, healthier buildings, and they're going to be able to say, we get this, we can deliver those more energy efficient homes, buildings, and communities. That's the clear direction that investors want, that the world is heading in.
I would agree with that. And if we step back and we look at it too, that has a flow-on effect for documentation in New Zealand when we're thinking about green leases. We've got ADLS leases and PCNZ leases too. So maybe the frameworks under those contracts will change over time too if legislation does. Ben, a question for you. Ben, I was very interested in utilisation of the low E-film versus double glazing. So a materials conversation, and maybe you could expand on that actually in terms of other aspirations that clients are talking to you about, what type of materials they're using in buildings to help achieve their sustainability goals.
Yeah, so yes, that one's quite interesting. It's quite a unique building. It was overshadowed from the west and the north, so solar gain, cooling was less of a driver. So it was more heat loss, reducing heat loss. They looked at the cost of double glazing, which meant they'd have to scaffold the whole building, which was actually the biggest cost. So then we started to look at alternatives. There's a number of low E glazing film products that mean it can be applied from the inside. It's kind of in between single glazing and double glazing in terms of performance, but a lot more cost effective, and apparently, very successful. The client anecdotally said, you can actually feel how much warmer the glass is compared to the frames. So it's a cost-effective, pragmatic way of doing it. Won't be the right solution for all projects, but it comes down to understanding your buildings. We carried out a lot of energy modelling to actually inform that, looking at where the best bang for buck would actually be for that building. Technology is changing a lot. Somewhat, but in other ways, we're kind of at that point that there's not much more that can change. When we're decarbonising, going electric, heat pump technology, a lot of it is actually just getting the building operating, commissioned, tuned as it should be. And that takes a number of years for new buildings. It doesn't happen from day one, despite best intentions. It's actually just keep on going. Technology has its place and it's going to keep on changing, but I think it's close to that kind of plateau of where it could be.
Awesome, thank you. Richard, a question for you too. The ANZ Business Green Loan recognises Homestar and Passive House. However, the residential green loan doesn't recognise Passive House despite it being a primarily residential standard. Is that going to change? I'm not sure whether that fits within your scope, but if not, we can certainly take this off online and respond, but I'll pass to you in case you can comment. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we may have to do that one separately. I'm not a passive house expert. What we've noticed though, there's a bit more demand for Homestar than passive house. So, and I'm not quite sure what that residential green loan, and I don't think we call it that. So that would have to be done offline, I think, Kelly.
No
But
problem.
certainly
Thank you.
within the business green loan, we're probably seeing more activity around that Homestar, particularly from some of the developers.
Awesome, thank you. So if you do want to know more about that, please get in contact with us and we can close out those comments. There's another one there that's quite similar, so we'll take those offline if that's okay. There's a couple of questions there too in relation to ANZ's operations and what we're doing property side. Like every other big business, we have aspirations around greening property, but there's a methodology and a process, as Ben has talked to making sure we're planning and we're making longer sustainable decisions around our asset base. We have Raranga, for example, which is a 5-star green building, which I understand we increased the rating of last year. In our green property paper and also in our climate disclosure strategy, we've also talked about divesting our infrastructure assets and creating a pathway to more Toy certified assets in the future. So we're making those bigger, longer term decisions and communicating our strategies, etc., alongside those. And we're also looking at our day-to-day operations too, like a lot of other businesses are, to see what we can do to reduce our operational emissions on a daily basis. Andrew, I might just pass to you again and Ben in relation to future, where you see green property heading. We've touched on technology, and there's an evolution underway in the property industry there, and that'll come more into play over time, particularly with measuring, monitoring and reporting on business performance. What are the international trends that you're seeing in the technology space that might impact us moving forward?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you. I mean, I think that there's a general awareness that with the move off fossil fuels, that people are really wanting to verify that in their buildings, and so NABERS and Green Star are a really great way to do that in your commercial buildings, because they drive you towards efficiency and electrification. And there's also a reflection that the grid is going to be more interactive. So you want demand responses, you want to be able to charge your EV, but at a time when the grid isn't peaking. So those sorts of things are really supported by good metering, which Green Star and also NABERS encourages and drives that interactivity and making the grid more resilient. That's really key. I think resilience in general is becoming a bigger subject item. So we have many clients using Green Star because they're required to report on the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, sorry about the long title, or TCFDs, and they're using a key credit within Green Star, which helps them evaluate how at risk their property is from surface water runoff, overheating, water shortages, key changes we're seeing in our weather events. And this is a really interesting point I can share with you. We've looked at the building code. The building code weather data is based on the 1960s to the 1990s, right? So if you take a midpoint, you're talking about the 1970s. A lot has changed since then, I think. So those are some of the key elements that we see changing: a focus on resilience, a continued focus on health and well-being, good metering and engagement with the grid, and we see those as really central to the future of New Zealand. The other one I would touch on briefly, apologies, is embodied carbon. So most of the OECD is moving to require measurement of embodied carbon in their building codes. If people want to get ready for that, that's a part of Green Star to measure how much embodied carbon you have, and there's an encouragement and a requirement to reduce that as we prepare. Embodied carbon is about 9% of New Zealand's greenhouse gas emissions, and that's the carbon associated with concrete, steel, timber, other building materials. So Ben and others like him are brilliant at helping with this, but that's something we just have to get on top of for the future and decarbonising New Zealand.
Fantastic. We'll keep it short, but Ben, any further thoughts before we wrap up?
Less on the technology side, but I think the way the buildings market is going, we're ultimately going to have carbon budgets for the building sector, and understanding how much is enough, what is your budget, and the way that's being thought about is building within a science-based target, avoiding 1.5 degrees of warming. So there's a lot of work going on at the moment with the Green Building Council as well. Every country is unique. Our grid's unique, so every country needs their own definition of what that actually means. But rather than you basically end up with an absolute budget or a target per building, and that's kind of the way we have to go, because the world has a limited budget of carbon emissions. So we're not quite there. There's a bit of work to do, but that's kind of the way the sector will be heading. I think, yep.
Fantastic. We're right on time. I would love to throw back to you, Richard, for another couple of points, but it's super encouraging to see the green loan options coming through to support the industry. So we'll leave it there for now, but I just really wanted to thank everybody that joined the call, that has given us feedback and contributed to the paper. Thank you to our guests today, and also to the property and construction industry and all of our customers and clients. It's really a collaborative effort to help us move forward to a greener and more sustainable New Zealand future. So with that in mind, thank you all very much for your participation, and we are really excited about the journey moving forward. So thank you very much.